Have you ever wondered why that man who seemed so interested suddenly started ignoring you, leaving you questioning your worth and replaying every conversation in your mind, desperately trying to understand what you did wrong? The truth is, his silence has nothing to do with your value and everything to do with psychological weaknesses that Sigmund Freud identified over a century ago. Weaknesses that reveal exactly why he cannot handle the intensity of genuine connection with an authentic woman like you. Today, I am going to expose the real reasons behind his ignoring behavior, and by the end of this video, you will never again mistake his emotional cowardice for strength or his psychological limitations for your own inadequacy. When a man ignores you, he is not showing strength or indifference, as he wants you to believe. Deep in his unconscious mind, Freud would tell us, lies a terrifying fear that he cannot even admit to himself. This fear is so powerful that his psyche automatically activates what Freud called defense mechanisms to protect him from facing this uncomfortable truth. The silence becomes his shield, his way of avoiding the vulnerability that comes with genuine human connection. What he fears most is not your rejection, but the exposure of his own emotional inadequacy. This unconscious fear operates like a program running in the background of his mind, controlling his behavior without his awareness. Freud discovered that our unconscious holds our most primitive anxieties, the ones we developed in childhood when we first learned that love could mean pain. When this man ignores you, he is unconsciously protecting himself from the possibility of being truly seen and found lacking. His psyche whispers that if he stays distant, he cannot be hurt, judged, or abandoned. The irony is that by protecting himself from potential pain, he creates the very rejection he fears. The most revealing aspect of this behavior is that it exposes his fundamental weakness, his inability to face his own emotions like an emotionally mature adult. Freud taught us that emotional health requires the courage to bring unconscious fears into conscious awareness and deal with them directly. Instead of doing this inner work, he chooses the path of avoidance, proving that beneath his apparent indifference lies a frightened child. This is not the behavior of a confident, secure man, but of someone whose emotional development stopped at a crucial point. His ignoring you reveals more about his psychological limitations than it ever could about your worth. Projection is one of the most destructive defense mechanisms Freud identified, and it explains perfectly why he ignores you instead of dealing with his own issues. When he projects, he unconsciously takes his own fears, insecurities, and negative feelings and attributes them to you or the relationship itself. He tells himself that you are too needy, too emotional, or too demanding, when in reality these are the very qualities he cannot accept within himself. By projecting his own emotional neediness onto you, he gets to maintain his false image of being strong and independent while making you the problem. This projection allows him to avoid the painful work of self-reflection that Freud considered essential for psychological growth. Instead of asking himself why intimacy feels so threatening, why vulnerability makes him panic, or why he struggles with emotional connection, he makes it about your supposed flaws. He projects his fear of abandonment by telling himself that you are clingy, his fear of not being good enough by deciding you are too high maintenance. This psychological sleight of hand lets him ignore you with a clear conscience because he has convinced himself that the problem lies with you, not him. The weakness revealed through projection is his complete inability to take responsibility for his own psychological landscape. Freud emphasized that emotional maturity requires owning our shadow, acknowledging our fears and insecurities rather than casting them onto others. A psychologically healthy man would recognize his discomfort with intimacy and either work on it or communicate about it honestly. Instead, he chooses the coward's path of making you the villain in his internal drama. This projection is not just unfair to you, it keeps him trapped in a cycle of emotional immaturity where he never has to grow or face his own psychological demons. Repression is the psychological mechanism Freud considered the foundation of all neurosis, and it perfectly explains why this man chooses to ignore you rather than face his feelings. When emotions become too uncomfortable or threatening to his sense of self, his unconscious mind automatically pushes them down into the depths where he no longer has to consciously experience them. The problem is that repressed emotions do not disappear. They find other ways to express themselves, and ignoring you becomes one of those outlets. He is not choosing to be distant because he does not care. He is being distant because he cares too much and cannot handle the intensity of those feelings. Freud discovered that what we repress has tremendous power over us, often controlling our behavior in ways we do not understand. This man's repressed emotions around intimacy, vulnerability, and connection are now driving him to create distance as a way to manage his internal chaos. He has likely spent years pushing down feelings of inadequacy, fear of rejection, or terror of being truly known by another person. When you trigger these buried emotions simply by existing in his life and wanting connection, his psyche responds by shutting down communication as a protective measure. The tragic irony of repression is that it creates the very problems it seeks to avoid. By repressing his need for connection, he creates disconnection. By repressing his fear of rejection, he creates rejection through his own behavior. Freud taught us that healing requires bringing the unconscious into consciousness, feeling the feelings we have avoided, and integrating them into our adult understanding. This man's refusal to do this inner work means he remains trapped in patterns that sabotage the very relationships he secretly desires. His emotional avoidance is not strength, it is the behavior of someone too weak to face his own inner world. The Oedipal complex that Freud identified does not end in childhood. It continues to influence how men relate to women throughout their adult lives in ways they rarely understand. If this man had an emotionally distant, rejecting, or overly controlling mother, he learned early that love from women comes with conditions, manipulation, or the threat of abandonment. His unconscious mind now expects all women to eventually hurt him the way his mother did, so he preemptively protects himself by maintaining emotional distance. When he ignores you, he is unconsciously recreating the familiar dynamic of his childhood, where love felt dangerous and unpredictable. Freud observed that men who never resolved their Oedipal issues often struggle with what he called the Madonna whore. Complex, unable to integrate sexual desire with emotional intimacy when it comes to women. This creates an internal conflict where he wants you but also fears you, desires closeness but associates it with being controlled or consumed. His mother may have been emotionally engulfing, making him feel like his independence was threatened whenever he got close to her, or she may have been cold and rejecting, teaching him that women cannot be trusted with his vulnerability. Either way, his adult relationships become battlegrounds where he fights ghosts from his past. The weakness this reveals is his inability to see you as an individual separate from his mother and his childhood experiences. Psychologically healthy, men learn to differentiate between past and present, between mother and partner, between childhood fears and adult reality. Instead, he remains trapped in old patterns, treating every woman like a potential threat to his autonomy or source of rejection. This is not sophisticated psychological protection. It is the behavior of a man whose emotional development got stuck in childhood. He cannot love fully because he never learned to separate his adult relationships from his unresolved maternal conflicts. When faced with emotional intensity or the demands of adult intimacy, this man unconsciously regresses to childhood coping mechanisms that once protected him but now sabotage his relationships. Freud identified regression as one of the most primitive defense mechanisms, where we retreat to earlier stages of psychological development when current challenges feel overwhelming. The silent treatment, ignoring, and emotional withdrawal are essentially adult versions of a child hiding under the bed or running to his room when things get too complicated. He is not handling conflict or intimacy like a mature man. He is reverting to the emotional age where avoidance felt like the safest option. This regression reveals itself most clearly in how he handles emotional conversations or relationship discussions. Instead of using adult communication skills like expressing his needs, setting boundaries, or working through problems together, he disappears emotionally and sometimes physically. Freud would recognize this as the behavior of someone whose ego never fully developed the capacity to handle adult emotional complexity. When you try to discuss feelings, future plans, or relationship issues, his psyche automatically reverts to childhood strategies because his adult self never learned healthier ways to cope with emotional intensity. The profound weakness this exposes is his inability to stay present as an adult when relationships require adult responses. A psychologically mature man can feel overwhelmed or scared and still remain engaged, communicating his struggles rather than disappearing. This man's regression shows that deep down, he is still that frightened child who learned that the safest response to emotional overwhelm was to simply not be there. He cannot give you adult love because he has never fully inhabited his adult self. His ignoring behavior is not strategic or powerful. It is the desperate retreat of someone whose emotional development stopped at the point where hiding felt safer than engaging. When a man ignores you, he believes he is gaining the upper hand in what his unconscious mind perceives as a power struggle. But Freud would tell us this reveals his deep sense of powerlessness in the relationship. The need to control through withdrawal actually exposes his fear that he has no real power or influence when genuine emotions are involved. He cannot handle the vulnerability of honest communication, so he resorts to the only control mechanism he understands, making you chase him through his absence. This is not the behavior of a confident man who feels secure in his own worth, but of someone who can only feel powerful by making others feel powerless. Freud understood that the compulsive need to control others stems from feeling out of control within ourselves. This man's ignoring strategy gives him a temporary illusion of dominance because he gets to watch you react, wonder, and possibly pursue him. His ego feeds off this dynamic because it confirms that he has some effect on you, some importance in your emotional world. However, this pseudo-power comes at the cost of authentic connection, intimacy, and the possibility of being truly loved for who he really is, rather than for the games he plays. The fundamental weakness exposed here is that he confuses manipulation with strength and emotional withholding with power. A truly powerful man does not need to create anxiety or confusion to feel important in a woman's life. Real power in relationships comes from emotional honesty, the ability to be vulnerable while maintaining your boundaries, and the courage to love without guarantees. His version of power is actually emotional cowardice dressed up as control. He cannot risk the real power that comes from authentic intimacy because that would require him to be genuinely strong rather than just appearing strong through manipulation tactics. Transference is one of Freud's most profound discoveries about how we unconsciously transfer feelings, expectations, and patterns from past relationships onto present ones. And this man is doing exactly that when he ignores you. He is not responding to you as the unique individual you are, but to the ghosts of women who hurt him before. His ex who betrayed him, his mother who disappointed him, or the first girl who broke his heart. His unconscious mind has filed you under the same category as every woman who ever caused him pain, and he treats you accordingly. When he withdraws and ignores you, he is fighting battles that have nothing to do with your actual behavior or intentions. This transference operates like an invisible filter through which he sees all your actions and words. If his ex was manipulative, he will interpret your genuine care as manipulation. If his mother was emotionally suffocating, he will experience your desire for closeness as an attempt to control him. Freud taught us that transference happens unconsciously, which means he genuinely believes his distorted perceptions about you are accurate and justified. He has convinced himself that ignoring you is a reasonable response to threats that exist only in his psychological past, not in your present reality together. The weakness this reveals is his complete inability to engage with you as a separate person rather than as a representative of his unresolved trauma. Emotional maturity requires what Freud called working through the transference, recognizing when we are projecting old wounds onto new people and taking responsibility for cleaning up our own psychological baggage. Instead, he makes you pay the price for damage you did not cause, punishing you for crimes committed by women you have never met. This is not protective wisdom gained from experience. It is psychological laziness that prevents him from ever having a genuine relationship with anyone because he never actually sees who they really are. Freud's concept of castration anxiety goes far beyond its literal meaning to represent a man's deepest fear of losing his power, independence, and masculine identity. And this fear drives much of his ignoring behavior toward you. In his unconscious mind, getting too close to you, committing emotionally, or allowing himself to need you feels like a threat to his very sense of manhood. He equates emotional intimacy with emasculation, vulnerability with weakness, and loving deeply with losing himself completely. When he ignores you, he is unconsciously protecting what he perceives as his masculine essence from being destroyed by the terrifying power of genuine connection. This anxiety manifests as an internal battle between his desire for you and his fear that wanting you makes him weak or dependent. Freud observed that men often experience women as having a mysterious power over them through sexuality and emotional connection, a power that can feel both irresistible and threatening to their sense of autonomy. His ignoring strategy becomes his way of proving to himself that he is still in control, that he has not been conquered or diminished by his feelings for you. The irony is that this desperate attempt to preserve his masculinity actually reveals how fragile and insecure his sense of manhood really is. The profound weakness exposed here is that his entire identity as a man depends on maintaining distance from the very experiences that could actually strengthen him. True masculine power comes from the courage to be vulnerable, the strength to love without losing yourself, and the confidence to need someone without feeling diminished by that need. His version of masculinity is so brittle that it cannot survive genuine intimacy, which means it was never real strength to begin with. A man who must ignore you to feel powerful is actually showing you how powerless he feels when faced with the opportunity for real love and authentic connection. Freud believed that sexual energy, or libido, must find expression somewhere, and when this man ignores you, he is unconsciously redirecting his powerful attraction and desire into avoidance behaviors because intimacy feels too dangerous to his psyche. Instead of channeling his sexual energy toward building connection with you, he sublimates it into the psychological work of maintaining distance, creating elaborate mental justifications for why he must stay away. This is not a conscious choice. but an unconscious defense, where his desire for you becomes the very reason he cannot be with you. His libido gets twisted into a force that drives him away from what he actually wants most. This sublimation reveals itself in how obsessively he thinks about the relationship while simultaneously avoiding it. Freud would recognize this as sexual energy being redirected into mental preoccupation, fantasy, and internal conflict rather than actual intimate connection. He may spend hours analyzing every interaction, planning what he will say or do, or imagining scenarios with you, all while refusing to actually engage in real intimacy. His sexual energy becomes consumed by the psychology of avoidance rather than the joy of connection. This internal struggle often creates more intensity than actually being with you ever could. The weakness this exposes is his inability to handle the natural flow of sexual and emotional energy that comes with genuine attraction. A psychologically healthy man can feel intense desire and let it motivate him toward deeper connection rather than away from it. This man's sublimation shows that his desire for you is so threatening to his sense of control that he must transform it into something else entirely. He cannot simply want you and pursue you in a straightforward way because his psyche has learned to fear the very intensity that could lead to real intimacy. His ignoring behavior is actually proof of how much he wants you, which makes it all the more tragic and self-defeating. The deepest wound driving his ignoring behavior is what Freud would recognize as a narcissistic injury to his idealized self-image. And your very presence in his life threatens to expose the gap between who he pretends to be and who he really is underneath. His ego has constructed an elaborate fantasy of himself as someone who does not need anyone, who is above the messiness of emotions and relationships, who is too important or sophisticated to be affected by something as common as love. When you show up authentically wanting connection, you inadvertently challenge this false superiority and force him to confront the reality that he is just as human, just as needy, and just as vulnerable as everyone else. This narcissistic wound makes him experience your desire for intimacy as a personal attack on his carefully constructed identity. In his distorted perception, your attempts to get closer feel like attempts to diminish him, to reduce him from the special, untouchable person he believes himself to be, to just another man who wants and needs love. Freud understood that narcissistic individuals cannot tolerate having their grandiose self-image challenged, even by something as beautiful as genuine affection. His ignoring becomes his way of reasserting his specialness, proving that he is above such ordinary human experiences as missing someone or wanting to be close. The ultimate weakness revealed here is that his entire sense of self depends on maintaining an illusion of superiority that real intimacy would shatter. A genuinely confident man does not need to be special or above others to feel worthy of love. He can be ordinary, flawed, and human while still maintaining his self-respect and masculinity. This man's narcissistic wound keeps him trapped in a prison of false superiority where he can never experience the joy of being truly known and loved for who he actually is. His ignoring behavior is not evidence of his importance or specialness, but proof of how desperately he needs to maintain these illusions because his real self feels too inadequate to be loved. Now you understand that when a man ignores you, he is not demonstrating strength or indifference, but revealing the deepest weaknesses of his psychological makeup, from unconscious fears and childhood wounds to narcissistic injuries that keep him trapped in emotional immaturity. The question you must ask yourself is this: do you want to waste your precious energy trying to heal a man who is too weak to face his own inner world? Or will you choose to invest in someone who has done the psychological work necessary to love you fully and authentically? If this video opened your eyes to the hidden psychology behind male behavior, subscribe to our channel for more insights that will transform how you understand relationships and help you recognize the difference between a man worth your time and one who is still fighting battles with his own shadows.